in process. All right, well, I'll just quickly introduce myself, and welcome to our roundtable discussion. My name is Erica Wortham. I am a local as of 2 years. I work at neighboring university at GW, George Washington University. I've been a colleague of several of the organizers of the film festival for a number of years, worked at this museum in its New York location for many years while I was in graduate school. So I'm an anthropologist, but I've had I've had one foot in the world of photography and documentary filmmaking for a long time as a maker, but more as a programmer. And I also work mostly in Mexico, although I consider my work somewhat hemispheric, looking at how Native people in Mexico and in Latin America have used media in an inclusive sense, radio, photography, video making, and television, in struggles for self-determination and autonomy. So I'm very happy to be part of this conversation. What I'd like to do is keep it pretty informal and ask these amazing women to introduce themselves to the audience, and I think we may have had a bit of a shift through the course of the day. So can we start over here?
Horue Yoli. My name is Natalie Grube, and I'm from a little island called Norfolk Island. Not many people have heard of Norfolk, and you're excused because it's tiny. It's about, I'm thinking of miles, I don't know. It's about 1,600 kilometres off the coast of Australia, the east coast, and it's actually closer to New Zealand. But we are a territory of Australia. So Norfolk Island has its own language and culture, which is another thing that people don't know about. The island's only 3 by 5 miles big, and the population is about 1,600. So, there's not many of us. I feel very privileged to be here. And everyone back home is really excited that little Norfolk Island is in, big DC. So basically, my story began with the Mutiny on the Bounty. Most of you might have heard of it. It was in 1789, when Captain Bligh was the captain of the ship, the Bounty, and they went to Tahiti to get breadfruit for the slaves in the West Indies, because English had all their colonies spread around the world at the time, and they wanted to find a really cheap food source for them. So they went to Tahiti, and they actually got stuck around the bottom of Africa. So they got delayed. So by the time they got to Tahiti to get the breadfruit, they'd gone out of season. And the guys loved that, obviously. They got all these beautiful Polynesian women looking after them. And compared to cold, wet, bleak England, they thought that Tahiti was a pretty magical place. And so they got there, and they were there for 5 months, just enough time to fall in love with the women and the lifestyle. They got tattoos. They really became part of the Polynesian culture, and they started speaking the language as well. And so, you can understand when they had to leave, there was a lot of heartbreak at that time. And so Fletcher Christian was the first mate on the Bounty, and I'm 9 generations down from him. And his partner, Moatua, was the daughter of a Tahitian chief. So I'm 9 generations down from her. So they fell in love, and Fletcher Christian mutinied against Captain Bligh on the Bounty and stole the ship. There's a very famous story of he put Captain Bligh in a longboat with his followers, and they had to find their way back. They ended up making it, which is incredible. But poor Fletcher Christian and his crew had to find somewhere to hide, and because, as you can imagine, mutiny is punishable by death. And they found little Pitcairn Island, which is very isolated. It's very small. It's I think it's 1 by 3 miles big. And they hid there for many, many years. They burnt the Bounty and they hid there. And so what happened was they actually went back to Tahiti before that and got a group of Tahitian women. And it was just this melting pot of all these different cultures. So with the Englishmen, you had Scottish, Irish. We had a man from the West Indies. There was an American. So it was this, all of these English accents with these Polynesian accents. So we were isolated for 60 years before we were found by an American whaling ship. So the language developed into this very strange but beautiful mix of 18th century English and 18th century Tahitian. So, after about another 60 years, the Pitcairn Island just got way too small for the growing population, and so the entire population moved to Norfolk Island, basically at the invitation of Queen Victoria at the time. So, yeah, so my culture is very strange because you can't think of two cultures that are more polar opposite than English and Polynesian. Polynesian's very free and very, what's the word, sort of gregarious, and, you know, they don't have many rules. It's more about like community and love, and they're very open and very uninhibited. And then you've got English, which is the opposite, really, especially back then, and the women. So I've grown up in a culture which is a bit of both, you know, and the language is very mixed. So if I was to say to you something like, "Hi, how are you? I'm going to go for a swim and I'm going to catch some fish down at the beach." I say, "Hey, wata we yoli? Side we gwena go I gwen g'day na we don't attain and I gwen get yoli some fish for supper." So you can probably hear like a little bit of both in there. But what happens with this culture being so small and so rare is that we don't have many champions of the language and the culture, I suppose you'd say. So I've dedicated a lot of my time growing up. I taught the Norfolk language at the school, and I started online language lessons, and I decided to study film to try and capture the stories of my culture. And I've just finished my film degree. And this short film that's playing tonight is just one of like a very short segment, about 2 minutes. And I won't go too deep into this because it gets very messy. But the Australian government took over my island in 2015 against the express wishes of the islanders. So they basically just said that we no longer can make our own local laws, and we don't have any say in things like importation or customs or immigration and things like that. And it's causing a lot of heartache. The levels of stress in the community have just skyrocketed. And it's I can't even talk about it without feeling a sense of incredible loss. And when I talk to my grandmother, who's a very, very much, I mean, she's very Tahitian looking, my grandmother. I came out blonde, by the way. It was very weird for everyone. But we are very fair there. So, but she can't talk about it without just sort of shutting down. So it's a really big issue, and I think the Norfolk Island people are just happy that there are people like me who have the capacity to go and study and get these stories out into the world.
Thank you. Thanks so much for sharing that. Would you like to introduce yourself to the group?
Hello, my name is Olivia Wyatt, and I'm from Little Rock, Arkansas. Grew up landlocked. I wish I came from an island with such an amazing history. I currently live on my sailboat in Marina del Rey, California. I have a film showing here it's called Sailing a Sinking Sea. It's about a nomadic seafaring community from the area of Thailand and Myanmar who predicted and all survived the Indian Ocean tsunami of 2004. And the tsunami, as many know, even meteorologists had no idea that it was coming. And shamans within the community were having dreams that the sea was turning red well in advance. So it's an extremely amazing community that lives so symbiotically with the sea. And unfortunately, since then, the population is declining, and children are not interested in carrying forth their traditions. So I felt it was important to go and create this film, and it shows tomorrow at 3 p.m. at the Free Air Gallery.
Excellent. Thank you.
My name is Karen Weinberg. I directed Keep Talking, which was shown here Wednesday night. And I am not Indigenous myself. I came to the story as an outsider. I was teaching editing and was sent to Kodiak, Alaska I'm from Chicago, sent to Kodiak, Alaska, and met a bunch of Kodiak Alutiiq people learning the software to continue saving their endangered language and culture. And I'm a nerd about language and culture, and I was fascinated, and I just kept wanting to know more, and I wanted to try to help and try to tell their story. So over a 5-year period, I kept going back. And, we had a few of the women here on Wednesday night. I'm sad that they weren't able to stay for today's discussion, because obviously it's best if they can answer questions in their own words, but I will do my best to tell my story as the one who was listening to theirs for so long.
Hello, my name is Chaska. My film was screened earlier. It's called Tarinakusun, Quechua in Seattle. That was my first film. It was a product of a university program assignment, but there are more coming. I am originally from Peru. I grew up with my Indian grandmother. A lot of that is in the film. You'll see if you haven't seen it earlier. And I moved here to the States when I was 14. I learned English really quickly and almost forgot Spanish. And then when I hit my 20s, I started to question or try to answer this question that was coming to me often. What are you? And so I started to think about my identity, and a lot of what I was hearing was about shame of being indigenous, and I resisted that concept, and I wanted to hear more stories of pride, and I wanted to reclaim my language, and I had grown up with my grandmother and being so close to her that to me, there was no other way but to honor her. And so that's the journey I'm on now. The film was mostly a personal story, but also my hope to find others like me, because I'm sure in modern world, we have a lot of communities that are forced to leave their communities, be away from their cultures and their homelands, and our experience is not very different from the experiences of many other indigenous people around the world. And how do we maintain our cultures, and how do we keep speaking in our languages, and how do we find community when we are culturally isolated? And those are some of the questions that I'm exploring these days. And I have returned to Peru for some time, and so yeah, that's my adventure.
Thank you. Roxanne?
I'm Roxanne Whitebean. I'm a Mohawk from Ganawage, which is near Montreal, and my film that's playing in the festival is called Garihunnoru Precious Things, and it's about the Mohawk immersion school that my community founded to keep our language alive. I started making films on the set of a television series called Mohawk Girls, which you guys probably haven't seen because it's a Canadian-based show, but it's doing pretty well. And I worked on the first, 4 or 5 seasons? I think the first 4 seasons. I became an assistant director, and then in 2014, I made my very first short drama called Legend of the Storm, which is about the 1990 Oka crisis from the perception of a child. And I based it on my personal experience during that time. And then I went on and I began working with CBC, and I made the first digital series on their new digital platform, CBC Short Docs. So it's a 5-part series, which actually chronicles my battle against breast cancer. I'm a survivor, and I did chemotherapy. I had a double mastectomy and all of that stuff. And what people don't realize is that a lot of First Nations reserves are, excuse me, there's industrial power plants that surround many First Nations reserves. In fact, my father, when he was a child, they didn't have money there, and the economy was really low, and there were these men in suits who came to see him and his friends, and they said, "Do you want to make some money?" And they said, "Yeah." And they hired them to bury toxic waste. So to this day, where they bury the toxic waste, snow never lasts. It melts immediately. The cancer rates are through the roof. And when I was a child, David Suzuki said that the next generation of young people, there's going to be a cancer boom. And he wasn't wrong, because now there are infants who are born with cancer in their bodies. They don't even last 6 months. I've lost many friends, and I almost lost my own life. So this is why I wanted to make this series chronicle my battle. I lost all of my hair. It's a very, very personal piece, but I went on and made another drama called The Paradigm, which had its world premiere at the LA Skins Film Festival. And I'm currently working on a film called Onyor Hatne with Cinema Politica, which means tomorrow, which is Mohawk children who are predicting the state of Mother Earth 200 years into the future. So it's a really interesting and fun project, but I'm also making a film with Telefilm called The Warden, which is about the 1960s scoop, and that's inspired by my mom's birth story. And I'm filming an Indigenous language documentary with the National Screen Institute. So thank you for thank you for inviting me here.
Thank you, Roxanne. An incredible array of stories and accomplishments. Thank you all for taking the time to tell a bit about your stories. So Mother Tongue Film Festival is obviously about languages and how deeply important languages are. And it's probably no coincidence that 87% of the filmmakers represented in this year's festival are women. I think there's something about storytelling and language and preservation and passing on that is not necessarily exclusive to women, but particular to our place in our families and in our communities. So I was wondering if each of you could speak a little bit about that sort of the calling of filmmaking or the calling of media making and how it relates to your own history or personal stories as storytellers, like how the contexts in which you decided to have the courage to become a filmmaker, the courage to be a storyteller in this kind of platform for these kinds of diverse audiences. Does anyone want to go first? Yeah.
I have a very silly story about this, and it involves me doing a terrible Irish accent, so I might as well just get it over with. We were in Ireland, and I was on a vacation, and we were at a pub, and we were going around the room. There were just a couple locals, and myself and my wife, and people were singing folk songs, traditional Irish folk songs. And it got to me, and I, tried to, sing a few lines of an Indigo Girls song, and I forgot the words. And this guy comes up to me afterwards, and he says, you don't have any culture, you Americans. You don't have, and it floored me, because I didn't even do the accent. It floored me because he's right, and it was the first time in my life. And they talk about being woke, white people especially kind of suddenly realizing, oh, I'm privileged, and oh, I'm not connected to my ancestors, and oh, and I've been going through this for some years. And I was down that path when I met the Kodiak Elliptic people, and I've got to say their journey to preserve their language and culture and being able to just be a fly on the wall for bits of that. I've learned so much. I hope others who see the film, and I've been told it's resonating with people, that not just Indigenous people, that anyone who isn't connected to their ancestors and their heritage, that there's a missing piece of identity because of that. And that was how I wound up feeling it was that important.
And you came to this project as a film editor mostly, right? But this is your first directorial role as a director. Can you tell us a little bit about that shift?
I had edited a bunch of documentaries at the point that I was up there teaching editing, and already knew that I wanted to try my hand at directing, but I hadn't found a story that felt important until I met these people and learned about what they were doing, and that felt important, and it is.
I began as a writer, mainly a commercial writer, so copywriting and things. I would be in my room full of boxes writing about luxury in Fiji, which was a stark contrast. So for me, growing up, there was no Norfolk content. I think my family were very musical, so I grew up playing a lot of music, mainly Polynesian style sort of music, like ukulele and that sort of rhythm, those sort of rhythms. But there weren't many role models, cultural role models, other than people you looked up to because you knew that they lived the Norfolk Island lifestyle and they'd worked really hard to sustain our way of life. But in terms of media, there wasn't any media really growing up. And I felt, even growing up, I felt like a lot of these old people were dying with their stories and they just weren't documented. I mean, the Norfolk Island museums have been great at interviewing them, so we've got archives of them talking. But as you all know, there's nothing like film in terms of reaching people. So I really felt I wrote all the content for the Norfolk Island Tourism Board, and I worked for one of the largest Pacific Island wholesalers doing all of their writing, and I really felt that there was a ceiling. I really felt like, one, I wasn't doing anything that was, contributing to the longevity of my culture, which was dying. These small cultures, with Norfolk Island as well, having that English part of our personality, cultural personality. You can have a room full of Norfolk Islanders talking thick Norfolk, laughing and everything, and then an English person will walk into the room and we'll all switch to English automatically, And then so with people coming in who were English into families, you'd see families transform from being people who spoke Norfolk to just speaking English, So it happened almost without us knowing. Our language just started to deteriorate in that way. So I think my big impetus was having children and knowing that my children probably won't be able to speak Norfolk. I married a man from Easter Island, a Polynesian man, a Rapa Nui. So in our house we had Rapa Nui, Spanish, English and Norfolk. And my children had speech delays, surprise, surprise. But I realised that there were some things that when you teach someone to something and it's just mouth to mouth, you say, oh, this word is this, or this means this. I mean, they might remember it, but they might not. But I found that with my kids, when they watch things like, they might watch Play School, they might watch a TV show and they memorize it. There's something about that mixture of audio and visual that make it stick in your mind, And so I thought, great, I want to do film. And so I packed up the kids, we went to Byron Bay in Australia and I studied a film degree. And it was a bit of a juggle, being a full-time mum and full-time study, but it was the most amazing, rewarding experience, and they called me like, oh, the Norfolk girl, because all my content was about Norfolk. But I've never felt so fulfilled because I felt like finally I was doing something that could preserve our culture and our language. And so the challenge for me now is, I think we were talking about it before, about that balance between the old and realising that culture is living and you need to change in time with it. So we're really struggling with that. And also we have a mixed culture, which is English and Polynesian, so we sort of have to almost create our own culture. It's quite a strange situation that we're in. But what I'm doing now is, so I did a 20-minute documentary on Norfolk Island and what's happening on the island at this moment with the Australian takeover. And it was the first film ever done just in the Norfolk language with subtitles, like the first film ever, which I found was bizarre, but it's just the way it is. So I've done that documentary. I've done a few small short films. I've done this one called Gwen Yern, which means it will be yours, and it's about the importance of handing on culture and not being ashamed to say no to something that strips your identity away. And my next project that I'm doing starting a master's in the beginning of this year, in the middle of this year, sorry. And I realised that all of my history was told from a white male perspective. All of the Bounty history, all of the Tahiti history, all of the Pitcairn history was all told by male scholars. And there was just gaps, and the only way we could really find the Polynesian or the women's perspective was to go through the artefacts, like the tapa cloth, the stories they were telling through the stuff we could find in like museum archives, And one of my very good friends is doing a thesis on the women of the Bounty, and I was talking to her one day, I'm like, oh, wouldn't it be amazing to tell the story of the bounty from the Polynesian women's perspective? And so we've got our heads together now, and we're working on a 3-part series that will tell the story of the bounty from the Polynesian women's perspective. So,
is that a documentary or narrative?
I actually want to make it like a factual drama narrative. Does that make sense? Because I want it to be something that it's emotive, but it's also has like a 3-act structure that you can follow, you know. And I think and make it quite cinematic as well. So that's what I'm working on at the moment.
Thank you. How we got to filmmaking and our place as storytellers in our communities.
Okay, so I always loved to write when I was younger, and I ended up working for Ganawagi Social Services as a family support worker for 6 years. And during that time, I wasn't writing, I wasn't doing anything, and then I went on maternity leave, and while I was on maternity leave, my daughter, who was here, she went to the mall. She was very young at the time. I think she was like 6 or something, and she came home from school one day telling me about this standoff between the Canadian government and the people, like the Mohawk people and all of this stuff. And she said, but that was like hundreds and hundreds of years ago. And she started explaining more to me, and I said, no, that wasn't hundreds of years ago. That happened, I was alive, I was a little girl. And she was like, no way. So when I finally convinced her that I was telling her the truth, because I showed her the dates, that was the only reason, that was the only way she would believe me. She was like, oh my God, what did you think and how did you feel? So when she asked me those questions, I started writing the story, and that's how I wrote Legend of the Storm, which started out as a poetic allegory and then turned into a screenplay. So I wrote it within like a few hours, and I was like, wow, this is so fun, you know, like I would just love to continue pursuing this and as a career, and I was just like dreaming big at the time. But I read it to one of my friends, David Miracle, who is a musician from Tyendinaga. He's a Mohawk from Tyendinaga. And he said, you know, you have something there. And he said, you need to go and pitch that somewhere. So I listened to him. And then now the rest is history. I think I've been in the business 4 or 5 years. So yeah, that's kind of how I got into filmmaking. But also growing up, I never really saw anything that really represented me and my people. It was like Dances with Wolves and stuff like that, you know. It was just like it wasn't authentic. It was just like, it wasn't written by an Ungwehue indigenous person. So I wanted to tell these stories, and hopefully I can continue working, and it's a very competitive business.
You want to tell us?
I think, like for Roxanne, I remember noticing there was a lack of Quechua perspective in the media. Surprise, surprise. And more particularly from the perspective of, I guess you could call us an urban indigenous person, right? A lot of what I did see was from the land and the traditional lives, but not of what was happening to our communities in cities. What's it like? Can you recognize us walking around the cities, etc.? You know, and so at that time, my son was already around, but I had, since he was born, since I knew I was going to be a mother, I had this extreme sense of responsibility and pressure to pass this culture onto my son, and I didn't have that to pass on, and so that definitely motivated me to also create stories that he can see himself reflected in. There's a couple of other videos I have worked on. Another one on language revitalization I helped a friend produce this film about his efforts in his community in Yakima in Washington. And the next set of videos that I'm working on will tell the stories of Peruvians or Quechua speakers in other countries, also not just in the States, but in other countries, and what they're doing and to maintain their cultures and how it looks, what life is like for a native Peruvian person in a new country.
Olivia?
So I studied still photography, and my first summer after school, I was fortunate enough to go and live with a community called the Warani, and they live in the Amazon, and I visited them via Ecuador, but I was very close to the Peruvian border. And I wasn't there to document, I was just there to experience and learn from the community. And it was then that I saw how amazing this culture was. They taught me so much, how you could slice a tree and gather the sap and heal wounds with it. And I just loved how they lived with nature and how spiritual everything was in the community. And I didn't grow up like that. Like I said, I grew up in Arkansas, and my mom's mother was an immigrant from Greece, and unfortunately she couldn't raise her. So we don't have any of our she wasn't raised with any of her culture or heritage. So this was my first real experience with a community like this. And and after that, I really wanted to capture films that help preserve these communities. And I have now made 3. My first one was in Ethiopia, and my second one was in Haiti, and the new one is in Thailand. But I really like, as much as I can, to look at communities on the brink of extinction and do everything I can to capture and show the youth from the community how important and beautiful where they are and what their traditions are.
Thank you. I just want to say that if you guys have questions for each other, please feel free. This doesn't have to be this way only in terms of generating questions. But I did want to pick up on something, Cheska, that you said earlier in the Q&A following the afternoon screenings, that you made a comment that how you learn language is as important as learning language. So I think about film schools and film programs and how it sort of teaches us to learn the filmmaking process in a certain way. And that there's this emphasis on authorship, right? Your vision as director, when in fact the filmmaking process is very collaborative by nature. And I'm wondering if you, in your experiences, have sort of, been frustrated by that emphasis on authorship, or if it's been, the opposite. Maybe it's been sort of a voice that you've been wanting, or a position that you've been wanting to have and haven't had the opportunity to have. But and also along with that, like in your filmmaking process, do you invite the people that you're making the film with to participate in the story making, in the shaping of the story, or in the filming of itself? And what do you pick up from your subjects along the way that influence the storytelling? You're nodding your head. You want to go?
Sure. As an outsider to the community, feedback was key. That there was no way I could have told the story in any way that was fair or respectful without. We had many feedback screenings over the years, and I would do them privately with the different participants. They're participants in the process. They're not subjects. That's a common word. And no. That was huge for our process, right up until the finished product, and then a screening with, multiple screenings actually with the Elders Council, one final one at the end to make sure everyone was okay with it.
Can you share an anecdote of maybe something that wasn't okay or had to get re-edited or reframed somehow?
Well, at the final screening, Nick Aokley, this wonderful elder who I hung out with a lot on and off camera as I was up there, Was, first of all, just watching him watch the finished thing was one of the best moments of the entire process for me, because he got the messages out that he wanted, but he wanted one change, which we were able to do. He said there's a scene where he talks about his struggles with with alcoholism and with lots of discrimination, not being allowed to eat in the same mess hall at the cannery, basically being treated like dogs, and how, now he's much happier. He wanted the scene to end with and he remembered the moment when he said, I'm much happier now because of what I'm doing for my people. So we were able to we were able to put that in. So, and hope was important to me in telling this story too, because we have less than 40 speakers of Kodiak Aluptic who are fluent native elders, and you have to include the new generation and include a vision for the future, I feel, in order to make that story whole.
I think that's one of the things I really like about documentary films is you can start with an idea of what story you want to tell, but it's not really your story. The story you'll find out at the end of your editing what the story is really, and I feel that that's how it should be. The people you're filming, they'll decide what the story is. And that's what happened with the short. I'm not sure that I had a very clear idea, except for that I wanted to show what's happening with language revitalization in Quechua in Seattle. I didn't know half of the folks that were in the film when I started the film, so it was a discovering process, maybe.
When I first started the process of documenting the Norfolk Island people, everyone would come up to me, oh, this would be so easy for you, because Norfolk people can be quite closed. We've been burnt in the past by media for a variety of different reasons. And they're like, oh, this would be so easy. As a Norfolk Islander, you have all this access to people and they'll open up to you and it'll be wonderful. And it sort of was, but on the other hand, I was a bit of a nervous wreck before I started filming, because there's a lot of pressure, And I had to get the funding, to get the film equipment to make the documentary. I'd done an online fundraiser through change.org. Was it change.org? No, Chuffed, sorry. And I basically made a small show reel of a Norfolk Island woman dancing in Polynesian style, but to one of our hymns, which is like a religious hymn, because the history goes back to the Norfolk, basically on Pitcairn, they all killed each other when they first got there. They couldn't, it was really horrific. They basically murdered each other off. And then John Adams, one of the remaining men, had a dream about Archangel Michael shooting him with a dart. Sorry, I got to pronounce my R's here. And he said, I need to teach this community the ways of the Bible. So he taught himself to read from the Bounty Bible. They'd had a few things that they'd saved off the ship before they burnt it. And so he led this remaining community, this mixed community, in the ways of religion, and they became a really moral and loving community, and that's what got them fame in England, and that's why the Queen of England gave them Norfolk. So, it was a sort of hard area to navigate, because we have a Pitcairn anthem, which is when someone dies on Norfolk Island, we play the song on the radio, and then the hearse goes through the town and everyone shuts their doors and they all stand respectfully as the hearse goes past. And then we go down the cemetery, we all sing songs, like our ancient hymns, and, say poetry and that to the person that's passing. And it's free to die in Norfolk, so if you want to die, it's a good place to die. Because the community gets together, we dig the grave and fill the grave, and the whole island gets flowers to put on the grave. So it's a really beautiful process. But in terms of filming it, I thought it would be easy, but then I went home and I was trying to get all these old Norfolk Islanders to talk, and they're like, no, sorry, not doing it. And I was like, hang on a sec. You know, we've got to get this story out there. It's really important. And so I had to, there's this man called Frank. This is a different film, sorry, but this one that you'll see tonight is a prelude to the documentary. I had to sit with him for days and just chat about like his mechanic stuff and everything, just to get his confidence. And then finally he allowed me to film him, and it was amazing, but it wasn't an easy process. And then I wanted to film a graveside cemetery, which no one had ever done before because it's sort of taboo. And I was given permission by the family, and that was also very nerve-wracking. Sort of I had the camera there and I could see people giving me these looks, oh, it's Nat, it's okay, but you know, like what you think is going to be easy, and it made me realise why people maybe haven't documented Norfolk in that way before, because in a small community it's really easy to be shot down. And I find that that's one of the worst things for our culture and the longevity of our language, is that people are always really worried about stepping out of place, you know. And even making this, I mean, I made this film while I was in Australia, the 2-minute film, and it's basically just hands acting, because I found that in the past we haven't been taken seriously as islanders because we have fair skin, majority of us. But you know, go back about 30, 40 years and there was a lot more dark skin, but over the years with people marrying into Australian families and New Zealand families, like our skin is quite fair now. And so people can often look at us, that we say we're Pacific Islanders, and they're like, no, you're not. You know, you're from Scandinavia, you know. So I decided I would make a film just using hands, basically, you know, to tell that story. And at the time I said to my lecturer, this is my great idea, I've had an epiphany. And he's like, it's never going to work. Just doesn't work, doesn't have a structure, doesn't have this. And then I went home like, okay, it's a shit idea. And then I realised that was another difficulty in making film, whether I was making film at home and trying to please everyone, or making film in an industry where people have expectations of what a film should look like. I had difficulty in both areas. So in the end I made this film anyway, and really liked it. And I'm in DC now with this film, which, you know, suck it to the lecturer. But it did make me realise that, like, if you want to make something and you're inspired to make something, you just have to go ahead and do it, because that's the drive and that's what other people recognise when they see your films. And I think in terms of cultural films, that there shouldn't be such a strict formula. I think it should just be about trying to tell a story. So that was my difficulty. Yeah.
So I never interject my voice into my films. This last film is told, it's based on interviews that I did with 13 different people in the communities on 13 different islands. And they have, you know, everything from the oldest woman I could find, who they believe she's around 98 years old, to one of the younger men in the community who is still the best spear fisherman. So you never hear my voice, you never see a talking head, you're just watching the day-to-day life and hearing the stories, the mythology, the songs within the community. And I worked with a total of 10 translators. That's including translators in the field and then translators in post. So the stories are told through the Moken language and also Southern Thai. And so I would have an elder Moken sit with someone who spoke Southern Thai, and then she would translate it to Thai, and then someone who could speak the regular Thai dialect would translate it to English. So the three of them were sitting together, and then I did the same in Myanmar as well. And then in the field, I often had 2 translators, one from Moken to Southern Thai to English. And then to end it all, I found a family in LA who speaks Southern Thai and Moken, and they sat with me, each one of them. We sat around a table and watched the whole film, and they'd say, oh no, that word is wrong. Let's change it. We need to make sure, actually, when they say this, they mean this. So it was really important to me that the language comes across perfectly in the translations, and I was lucky enough that the film showed in Singapore, and it allowed me to go back to Thailand and screen on most of the islands. And we would set up a little TV and DVD player in some of the huts. and everyone in the community would come and watch, and not a child budged. You know, I've never seen a 3-year-old sit still for so long. I mean, so I'm very happy. Everyone in the community really loved it and thanked me, and they're sharing it with their relatives on places that I wasn't able to make it to. So I'm very happy with the result.
Awesome. Thank you. Roxanne, do you want to respond to that one? Remember what we were talking about?
Yeah.
Sort of the tendency to maybe be more collaborative.
Yeah. So I usually find the story, first of all, and then I sit with the participants and just talk about the film. I tell them what my vision is, why I want to make it, and all of that. And then I'll shoot the film, and I find with whether you're shooting fiction or nonfiction, no matter how much you plan it, the story takes on a life of its own. And even with like the dramas that I've written and envisioned, like I envisioned it a certain way, and then as we're shooting it, the actors or the people involved would sort of bring their own life to it. So I usually just go with that. I go with the flow of things, and I do show the people in my films the rough cut of the film, and I only to see if I'm presenting them properly, if they're happy with how they're coming across on screen. And usually they are happy. I made a film called Little Hard Knocks, which can be streamed on CBC. And it's a little boxer from my community, and he's had like so many fights. He's only 10 years old, but he's been traveling all over the place. And he even got to travel to Cuba to train with Mario Kindelin. I'm not sure if I pronounced his last name properly, but he's a 2-time Olympic gold medalist. So anyway, we had a whole lot of fun making that, but there was one part where it was one of the boxers, like a famous boxer. He said he likes him, but he doesn't want to be as old as him. And he was like, no, I don't want him to see that. So just little things like that we'll take out. But I very much include them in everything that I do because it's their story as well. And without them, I wouldn't have a film. One of the funny experiences that we had making Gardihuan Nordu Precious Things was that the little girl, Yagardihuan Nirdats, when I had 4 shoot dates planned for that film. So day 1 we shot, and then it was like the Christmas break holiday for everyone, so we weren't able to shoot until like February. We continued shooting, and on day 1, she had her front teeth, and when we returned, her 2 front teeth fell out the night before the shoot, and I was like,
Continuity problem.
yeah, I'm like, okay, hang on a second. I thought about it, and I'm like, okay, well, we're just gonna have your mother talk to you about your teeth, you know, because she was shy to talk because she had a new lisp that was like brand new because her 2 front teeth were gone. So anyways, I just wanted to share that. But I think it's important to be respectful and include everyone throughout the entire process.
Do we need to leave time for questions from the audience? Where's the festival person? Yeah? Okay. Should we start now, you think? We have half an hour. I wanted to ask one last question, and then we can open it up maybe. And that has to do with sort of how you prefigure, think about your audience, something you brought up, Nat, and also distribution. And if there's also, well, this is sort of a multi-part question, but a lot of times that aspect of it tends to be like a final frustration, like, okay, it's finally made, it's done, but if you don't, the distribution and getting it out to audiences can be tricky. Also with some of the content of films that are about Native cultures, there's a sensitivity about, displaying everything for everybody and in terms of the communities and what the communities want and don't want to show. So that's an aspect of the question as well. So how did you think about audience? How did you think about distribution maybe going into it, or was it something that you had to worry about after? Was that also something you had to obstacles you had to push through as women filmmakers? or not?
I know for me, when the documentary I did was one of my subjects at university. So I did my rough cut, and we sat down in the class. And I was a mature age student with all these like 18 and 19-year-olds, you know. And the teacher's like, we watched it, and then the teacher asked the guys in the classroom, so would you guys go to cinema and watch that? And they were all like trying to be nice, and they're like, probably not. And then she's like, so what does that say to you, Nat? Like, you've got to do something different. I'm like, yeah, but they're not my audience, you know. I would never make a film about Norfolk and their political struggles and my culture and pitch it to that age group, you know. And she's like, oh, good, well, that's a good answer. It means you know your audience. But I did go back home and thinking, oh God, how can I appeal to them too? You know, maybe put some beautiful women in there, I don't know. So, you know, I realised you get to that point where you're like, you can't please everybody, you know. And then there was also a part of me that was really defiant, like, no, I'm making this film for me and my people, you know. I shouldn't have to please anyone. Then I'm like, well, if I'm making it for me and my people and it doesn't interest anyone else, then my story's not going to get out there. So it was definitely a moment of having to figure out how I would make that balance between making a film for me but also making it so other people would be interested. And yeah, so I guess the balance I found with that was 90% for me and my people, because they were the ones I were trying to inspire, because I really feel like change has to come from within a community. I mean, obviously it's great to have help from outside of a community, but I feel like it's got to start in the roots and then come out, you know, so that the change has to come from the people wanting to prolong their culture and save their language. And then, so I thought, if I can inspire my community, maybe inspire the children, they can start making their own films, and they might make films that resonate with their age groups, you know. So that's sort of maybe 90% for me and 10% for the rest of the world.
So I've made many films from different genres, and I usually do some research on my audience. For example, I have a film called Flat Rocks that screened at the Big Sky Film Festival yesterday, and that is about land and culture and how the International Seaway, the St. Lawrence, along the St. Lawrence River, destroyed my community and destroyed our connection to the land. So I knew that like land defenders and environmentalists and people like that would be interested in the film. But then when I filmed Little Hard Knocks, which is about boxing, I really visited a lot of different boxing clubs to see what kind of music they listen to and different things like that. So I ended up, my friend Jesus, who was the first Native Canadian to win a VMA, was making rap music with Taboo and different things from the Black Eyed Peas. So he ended up giving me some music to use in the film, and it really worked out nicely. And I think it's important to research and find your audience. That's like one of the biggest things. Usually when we write pitches or even apply to broadcasters and different things like that, they ask you, who's your target audience? They want to know, they want to see if you've done your homework. So it's really important.
Did that come up for
I just wanted to say I definitely found that as well. You know, I was also fine about wanting to make what I wanted to make. But with the story of the Mutiny on the Bounty with the women, I went and met with a head producer of a Foxtel documentary in Sydney, and told her my idea. And she was like, "Okay, what's your market? Where's your niche? Who are you trying to reach?" And I was a bit floundering. I was floundering, thinking, oh, "Okay, I need to work in this industry." And so I went away and really focused on that. And I feel like, you know, if you want, you can make the things you want to make, but you definitely have to. If you want to succeed in the industry, you have to play the game. So, I mean, obviously, it helps with the filmmaking process too, because you can pare it down a little bit.
I'm very lucky because this film that I created, it's played all over the world. It got distribution. It's done really well. It was not only accepted by the community, that I documented, but by a broader audience. But I want to say that when I went into it, all I was thinking about was making a film that the community themselves was proud of. I didn't think about a Western audience at all. And along the way, every editing, screening I had, people told me, the way you're doing this is wrong. Where are the talking heads? This isn't traditional. And I didn't listen. I listened to my heart, and I listened to my God. And I made a film that I thought was right. And in the end, that was the best decision I could have made. Because one of my distributors, which is Documentary Educational Resources, 5 people submitted films about the same community the year that I did, and they accepted mine because it had a unique voice and it told the story in a different way. So I just want to say, like, for everyone that's making work, just, listen to your heart and create from your heart, and don't get so bogged down by the voices of others.
Thank you. That's a great note to end on. Did you want to talk about how you guys think about audience, or should we open it up? Let's take some questions. Do you guys have questions for the filmmakers? I can share the microphone. Yes. I think we can hear you.
Okay. I was just thinking about, y'all being women in film and thinking about the communities that were part of it, would be very difficult stage to be in. And I was wondering if you've ever received a bit of advice or thinking about your story, this pushback, if you're well, who do it? Have you ever received a bit of advice from a cohort or a mentor or a fellow women filmmakers that really stuck with you that you carried through? Sorry, that's a big question.
I think everyone's thinking. Yeah. Everyone's going, okay, well, what counts as?
I recently went to a it was my husband, my ex-husband, is a musician, and he was invited to go and play on the coast of Australia with an Aboriginal group of women, and they had all these female filmmakers come down. So I was like, yes, this is great. And I ended up talking to this woman from Canada. I don't know what tribe she was from, but she was telling me she was from the one that's on the news a lot. Usually you have a lot of bad media. And she said, you've probably heard of them, but I hadn't. But she told me that she made a story about her placenta. Have you seen this story? Her name's Julie. Do you know? No. Oh, no. So the story was about her having her placenta, both her son's placentas, and not knowing what to do with them, and wanting to do it traditionally, but sort of finding out who she was in her culture along the way, and just being like, what do I do with these? She's got these buckets. She's like, what do I do with these placentas? Because she really, really wanted to do the right thing with them, and was really upset. And so she was documenting the whole process, and she ended up she found the right spot she wanted to bury them. She went out to this reserve, and then she changed her mind last minute. And so she was telling me about the film process, and she was saying she was under so much pressure to make a resolution at the film. You can't just end a film with her not burying them. It has to be finished. And she didn't. She just ended the film saying, I still don't know, sorry. And they said to her, of course, that's not a very satisfying ending for an audience. And she just said, but that's the ending. That's how it ended. My placentas are still in my freezer. And she was just so candid about the experience, and she was so proud of the fact that she didn't do that cliche ending. And it actually people really appreciated that when they watched the film. And I think she just said to me, don't feel like you need to always follow the rules. And that really did stick with me. So, she was one woman. There's a lot of women who I look up to, but she's one.
I guess what comes to mind for me is I did something that I would ignore, that I was told. I was on a panel with some other filmmakers talking about ethics, because there are a lot of ethical challenges especially, I think, in documentary, where you're actually dealing with people's lives and their life stories. And the question of permission, it was a give and take to earn and keep trust in the community as an outsider for me. And I think there are benefits to being an outsider versus being an insider, and there are pros and cons to both, of course. But I was able to ask questions that might be very uncomfortable for someone who knows that you're not supposed to ask that. So that was another thing. But the issue of like someone had given permission to talk about a certain thing in their lives, and we shot for a year. With this understanding that they were okay with this, and then they rescinded permission, and then I'm left with like, well, we've gone in this direction, and I mentioned, without saying what the issue was, I mentioned this in this ethical discussion, and one of the expert filmmakers said, well, you leave it in. They signed a release, and you don't have to listen to them. And I just, from my guts, was like, that is wrong. So I think you have to kind of play it by ear a little bit and listen to your own gut. Yeah, so it's along the lines of do whatever feels right in that circumstance, despite maybe what seems like the expert advice.
For me, when I first started, I think I was only working on Mohawk Girls for about a month or two, and I wanted to apply to the Canada Council for the Arts for a production grant to make the film. And my mentor at the time was like, I have no problem signing on as your mentor, because when you've never made a film before, they want to make sure that you're going to actually follow through and that you have a mentor who has experience and blah, 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 blah. So she's like, I have no problem working as your mentor, but this is what's going to happen. You have to build your career. You have to write the grant. You have to do all of the research. You have to do the casting. You have to do all of this stuff, because no one is going to build your career but you. I'm building my own. My mentor told me the same thing. You have to work hard, and you have to work hard to pursue your career. So her saying that, I had to do all kinds of research. I learned about casting. I learned about writing budgets and all kinds of different things by reaching out to people and getting their daily rates, and it was like a boot camp. So I think it's really important to, when you're first starting out, especially to listen to the people, the professionals in the field, whatever kind of advice that they have to give you, to listen to them, because they know what they're talking about. And
there was definitely times when I felt, I've grown up feeling quite equal to men, I was quite a tomboy growing up, and I played football and all that sort of stuff. I never felt that there was something I couldn't do. But I was the only female in my entire class of filmmakers, and they were a lot younger than me. And I fell pregnant. I miscarried that baby. But I remember falling pregnant completely. I was just about to break up with my husband. And I remember I was saying, I'll have the baby, And I was in class, and the lecturer was talking, but it was just like this. I wasn't hearing anything. And I remember looking around at all of my male colleagues and like, you guys don't have to ever be in this position to have to maybe compromise your entire career, because of this. That's probably one of the biggest times I've ever realised that being a female can have, I wouldn't say there were drawbacks, but it's definitely there's definitely challenges. And being a single mum as well, it was like juggling both and feeling guilty that I wasn't doing either of them properly. So, but the flip side of that was when I finished university and I got my films out, they were like 10 times more satisfying, and than I imagine it was for my male colleagues. So it's one of those sort of weighed up things, I guess.
I guess I'm thinking of various areas of life and work where we are told there's a formula to this, and that I've come across that kind of conversation with film, with writing in particular. This is the way the story goes, and this sort of thing. And I definitely, being an indigenous person, understanding that we have our own way of doing things and our own way of understanding things, our own way of telling things, or telling stories, experiencing things. We have to sort of create our, follow that, and not be too limited by the rules. And that, I was thinking of something that we were talking about earlier. The audience, for example, oftentimes when we have to fit these rules, then we end up having to change our story. And as an indigenous woman, I really resist that. I resist that, yes.
Sticking to your story, that's important. Any other questions from the audience? Yes.
I'm curious how, in your own experiences in your communities, if, not necessarily if you have those kinds of experiences, but how that, if you think about that, how that affects the way you look at filmmaking, that, you know, even in these celebrated realms, media making, there's so many responsible systems, that then, of course, disproportionately affect people who are indigenous, or people who are more.
Everyone looks at me. Okay, so let's see. All of the men that I work with are very respectful. I did have some really bad experiences, though. One was when I was shooting The Paradigm. I was crossing the border. I was in my vehicle, an SUV. Everyone who was with me were men, mostly older white men. So as we're going through the border, I give my IDs and different things like that, and the agent asks me, so what are you doing? And I said, we're going location scouting because we're shooting a film. And he looked at me and he said, can you roll the back window down? So I roll it down and it's all men. And the border agent's looking at me and I'm just wearing like a t-shirt and whatever, and I guess I don't look like a boss lady or anything. And he's like, oh yeah? He's like, where are you going? To the hotel up the road? Are you gonna star in it too? And I was just like, I was like, and I looked at the men and their faces just, they put their heads down and like I was embarrassed. I was embarrassed for them. I wanted to smack the guy. He ended up making us pull over and they brought us all in. They went through all our stuff and then finally he was like, do you guys have business cards? And we all did, to our companies and stuff. So then they saw that it was like legit. And I couldn't believe that that happened, but it did, and I'll never forget that. And I do find that, I guess, like the veterans in the trade, especially when they're older and men that don't really work with you, they have a hard time respecting you when you're a young woman and respecting what you want. And I did have to kick people off of my sets. And that was one of the things that my mentor told me was, you're the boss. You have to put your foot down. Don't let people walk all over you. If you have to send them home and fire them, do it.
I had a bad experience at one point as well, not working on this film, but as an editor, and it wasn't anything as nearly as traumatic as what it sounds like you went through. I'm sorry that happened. I was in an edit room with a very well-known director and a few women and an editor, and we were reviewing a big project we'd been working on. And this very well-known director proceeded to make incredibly lewd comments about a documentary subject throughout an entire day. And we were too shocked to say anything. But the women in the room, we just kept looking at each other like, is this actually happening? Like, we couldn't even believe our ears. So, yeah, it's out there, and it's awkward. And you try to avoid working with those people again. And I guess if anyone had been in the room, none of us said anything, and it still kind of sticks with me because we're not shy. These are women you would expect we would have said something, and myself included, and it sticks with me that we didn't.
When I was part of my university degree, have you guys heard of the Blues Fest? There's like an international blues fest in Byron Bay, which is really big. So they have all these big artists from around the world come and play. And so part of my university degree is we film it. We go on a big long lens camera and on the stage, and we film the live to audience feed. And it wasn't me, it was the only other female studying film with me. And she's a really strong, powerful woman, and I didn't think that she was very vulnerable. And she came to me crying after her set. And I was like, what's wrong? What's wrong? So she said, we were just filming, Missy Elliott, I think. And the guys because when you're filming, you've got people talking to you on your headphones saying like, pan left, pan right, I want the bass guitar, I want you to do a slow pan here, blah, blah, blah. And they kept telling her that she had to film the women's crutch, the female artist's crutch, and saying really lewd comments in her ear, like, would you F her? And, or she's fat and things like that. And Lisa couldn't say anything because she was in this professional environment trying to stay really professional and didn't want to be classed as being like, as we do get sometimes put into those pigeonholes of being like a crazy feminist, And so she came to me crying and saying, what do I do? I feel like, this was last year, so, you feel like we should be in a more progressive industry. And I said, you've got to say something, And so we told our lecturer, and he ended up getting this other guy in trouble. And this guy came up to us and said, how else am I supposed to talk to you about filming that region? And she said, unless the vagina is singing, I don't think you should have to film that region. And so me and her are actually writing a script about a singing vagina at the moment, inspired by that. But you think, I was shocked, I'm like, surely not in this era, but it's still pretty rife. I think you've just got to be strong, but also make a bit of fun of it, maybe, or not a fun, but you've got to bring it to light as much as you can. And stick together. Yeah.
How about one last question? I think we've got time. Yeah, we've got 10 more minutes. Anybody have another question? So yes, Josh. Yeah, we've heard a little bit about next projects. One's in. You want to reiterate a little bit? Tell us a little bit more. I know you had a couple things going on.
I am shooting an Indigenous language documentary with the National Screen Institute and the Indigenous Leadership Institute based in Winnipeg. And they created a mentorship program across Canada where communities who are advanced in language revitalization could mentor another community who is just beginning that process. And so we're documenting everything. And they wanted to come to Ganawage, and I ended up coordinating everything, but then I also got hired as the filmmaker. So it was really, really beautiful to see, but then I learned that this one community only has 2 first language speakers left, and there are only around 10 second language speakers. And the first language speaker, one of them is like 90 and the other one is 70. So they're in a really bad situation, and it was sad to see the desperation in their face. And then the other film, there's actually going to be a national gathering in March where they're going to show the film. They're going to bring the filmmakers, but also the community participants together. And then I'm shooting a telefilm thing called The Warden about the 1960s scoop, and then I'm shooting On Your Hot Ne with Cinema Politica. You sleep.
Busy. Yeah. It's so busy. You want to tell us a little bit about what you're thinking?
Sure. One of the projects that I'm working on is actually a combination of video and web, and it's hopefully it'll be an open source tool for language communities to use and create online communities and be able to use existing things. But okay, let me rephrase that. What would this look like? It would allow the diaspora's communities to find each other and find tools that they can share, find teachers, find cultural events, or any opportunity that's relevant to language or cultural revitalization. And one component of that is video storytelling. What are some examples of what's being done around these communities or around the world? So that's one project. Another one is earlier when we were showing the films, I talked about my recent move has been back home, to go back home with my son. And so one of the things that I found there was something I was not expecting at all in this beautiful, beautiful Indian town where I was going to reclaim my language and my culture. It's very much a New Age refuge these days, and so language and culture are underground now. And it's been a painful process, a painful experience to go back home. And I would like to do that next, is tell the story, or hopefully, tell the story of Pisa from the local perspective.
Thank you. What about you, Karen?
I actually want to do something outreach related with the Keep Talking film along the lines of what you're talking about. I'd like to get all of your info, actually, because I want to help connect communities. We have different outreach plans depending on funding that comes in, but we want to create something that raises visibility for language revitalization in different communities. The next slide.
I have actually just pitched in. I'm starting to work on a series that looks at weddings all over the world. So looking at a culture through the weddings. I'm always looking at what bridges the gap. So music is a big thing, and weddings is a celebration that everyone can relate to. So working on that series, and then also I would like to make it an ethnographic film, but of the ocean itself and the communities that surround it, because there's such a shift happening with the ocean, and this last film I did made me really aware of that, even more so because the community was based there, and that's a very large project that I'm looking at doing and trying to get many people to collaborate on it with me. So it's in the works, but I don't know how far away.
Great, thank you. How about you? Okay.
Yeah, so I touched on the film that I want to do, The Women of the Bounty. It's called The Woman's Bounty. But I really want to make it big budget, so I'm going, when I do my master's, it's a year and a half, and basically you start with a project and you work on that project the whole way through, and then you get producers on board and funding and broadcasters. But as a side project at the moment, I'm developing an album of children's songs in the Norfolk language. So that doesn't exist either in Norfolk, which is really sad, and I taught Norfolk at the school from kindergarten to year 10 for many years. And even now I go back to Norfolk in the holidays, and all those young kids that still like talk about the lessons, and you can tell they're so hungry to learn about their identity and learn their language, you know. And it shouldn't, but it always shocks me at how much they grasp onto it. And I feel like there's just a really big gap in the preschool area. So just doing some cute little silly songs in the language, because I feel like that's a really good way to get language in. But also I work as an animator as well, so do these little sort of cute animations that have like a culturally based. So that's what kids keep me busy.
Do you sleep?
Yes. Enough to do kids' songs, like the Wiggles. They don't really sing. I don't know.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for sharing so much of your stories and the background of your films with us today at the Roundtable. So I think the films resume in this theater at 7 p.m. tonight. There's a whole nother series of programs, so I invite you guys all to come back. And if we could just end with a round of applause for our filmmakers. Thank you. Yes.